I'm thrilled to be on stage with Eddie Martucci, the CEO of Akili. It is as you guys will shortly learn, a deeply radical learning platform based on neuroscience and everything. I think you're going to go through a few slides just on what Akili is, because it's certainly, what's that? We moving out? It's a little bit of it's certainly a different beast from probably any company you've seen here at the ASU GSV Summit. Yep. And there's a guy, Chris Hohenserek, who you don't know, but he's a longtime legend in the education sector. He always said if there was just a pill we could take to learn better, then wouldn't everybody be doing it? And that's a little bit of what you're doing. So thanks for being here, and we'll let it roll.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll try to just do 5 minutes or so to get some background, and then we could talk. But great to be here, and thanks everyone for filtering in. It sounds like there's a lot going on. It's an odd place for me to be. I'm not typically at events like this. I'm usually at really hardcore healthcare events and medicine events. And the reason is what we do at Akili, we're a company that's about 6.5 years old. So we're pretty young, and about as young as the field of digital therapeutics, which we were one of the first companies out talking about this. And that phrase is really important, digital therapeutics, because what we and a few other folks in the world, I think at the time, were saying was not just that could digital help medicine, just like everyone was saying, can digital help any industry? We asked, could digital be the medicine? And we firmly believed that if we had the right type of technology underlying digital platforms, we could actually develop brand new type of medicine, truly that word medicine or medication, that was not a pill, but was actually delivered through an interactive device, which sounds like one of those, yeah, great, but that can never happen, right? Sure, that's a wonderful pipe dream. But we're making it happen, and a number of other companies now are, and we're really excited about it. What we do is we deliver sensory and motor stimulus into front-end video gaming environments. And so we're many times covered as either the first video game healthcare company or the first medicine company that uses video game mechanics. You can pick your poison. But that's what we do. And so we leverage the very best of entertainment video games with the very best of medicine. So we license technology out of universities that have been studied, and I'll talk about how that works. And then we have so we have about 55 people at the company today. We've tried to maintain it about that level. About half of the folks are neuroscientists and clinicians, and then the other half of folks are video game designers. My co-founder was actually the executive creative director at Lucasfilm, and then hired some of his best buddies to sort of come in and develop a true entertainment experience. And so we like to do the best of everything, and we have a digital medicine platform that is being developed to treat a number of neurological conditions, and then we'll see why that actually links to this conference. So very, very briefly, we've known that this is how the brain works, and this is highly relevant. Most of the time at healthcare conferences, people don't think like this. At these conferences, we do, which is that the brain is a interconnected, rapid network of essentially firing and communication that helps us do everything we need to do, from talk to, of course, learn. That's not news. We've known that for decades. But to treat neurological conditions, we haven't been actually utilizing this approach at all. We've been using pills that deliver molecules. And by the way, I'm trained as a biochemist. I have a PhD in biochemistry and biophysics as a drug developer, so a little bit odd there. But what we tend to do for medicine is take pills that are molecules that bind receptors randomly in the brain. And we know that that's not optimal, and we've seen in medicine why that's not optimal. Many drugs don't work very well, and almost all drugs for the brain have significant side effects. And most importantly, they're not getting at function. So what we think we can do differently by developing targeted stimuli is do exactly that, target. We think we can target certain neurological regions, for instance, the midline prefrontal cortex, where attention resides. We can target that without targeting other parts of the brain. We can also target functions. So one of the big things, and I hope we get to talk about it, one of the big things that we've been treating in healthcare for a long time is symptoms. What's the kind of resulting symptom from a neurological condition? We almost never are able to address functions at the functional level. That's what the education world understands, right? How do we get performance? That's what we really care about. And so I think for the first time in medicine, we'll be able to do that. And I'll show just a very quick bit of data in a second to that effect. So we did develop ourselves as a medicine company from day one. I'm the co-founder. and decided to over-invest, if you will. So we've raised a lot of money and still don't have a product on the market 6 years later because we've been investing in clinical trials.
How much?
We've raised $55 million to date, not counting a couple partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, which sounds a little odd, but to do research and development. So we're in the process of bringing in more capital now, all geared at essentially doing clinical trials, from small to larger clinical trials, resulting in, at the end of the day, and this is where we made our mark 6 years ago, resulting in FDA approval. And so that's the kind of, as a lot of folks have called it, the game changer, the pun, which is that we set out from day one saying we want to do the best damn science we can to get the first FDA-approved platform that looks like a game, looks like consumer tech, but in fact is medicine. And doctors can prescribe it, and insurers can cover it. And what we found in our research is docs are actually very amenable, but there's skepticism, of course, because they're used to writing prescriptions for pills. Insurers are more amenable than you think, but there's skepticism. And then other stakeholders who aren't usually included in the medical system, and many of them reside in education for our first product, are very amenable because they understand this at a more basic level than traditional medicine. So the way our products work, just very briefly to give you a sense, the top and bottom panels are what a patient experiences. So this is actually a snapshot of our first product, which is a treatment in development for pediatric ADHD. A child is doing this. So what they think they're having fun, they are having fun, actually. They think they're able to disconnect in the moment from the experience. That's one of our design ethos that I think is critical, is that in the moment of treatment, a child, or an adult for that matter, doesn't have to constantly be thinking about, I'm getting treatment right now. They're actually able to disconnect and just enjoy and have fun and engage at a deep level. But what's happening is, second by second, our algorithms are sensing the performance of where an individual is weak and then deploying stimuli to activate the part of the brain and the functional level that we need to get treatment type effects or prescription grade effects. And so that's all happening under the hood. So we have a pretty deep algorithmic system underneath that we actually just got IP issued on a week ago in both the US and Japan, broad IP, in this day and age when algorithm IP is near impossible. So big congrats to my head of IP, actually. She's getting a very fancy dinner this coming week. So really briefly, just to give you a snapshot, and then I'll be done and we can talk. We actually have spent the last few years developing our lead product, which is, I said, is a pediatric ADHD treatment. It's meant to specifically target frontal function, and what I mean by that is attention, inhibitory control, working memory. So things that are really disruptive in a child's performance when they have ADHD. And we've had 2 different publications showing benefits in ADHD, and then we actually just completed a phase 3, and I mean that seriously. We sat down with FDA 3 years ago. We designed a 350 subject, 20-site nationwide trial run at all traditional drug centers, but instead of going home with a pill, children were going home with an iPad and using our product. Or an active control, which was an educational word style product. And we asked the question, can we robustly improve attention in these children? And so the result we got was really astounding and exciting to us. So our product on the left in blue compared to an educational game that, by the way, engaged children just as much as our product on a test that is FDA cleared, an FDA cleared test to measure attention and inhibitory control. We get large effects, a 1-point change in this measure. It's an objective measure of attention and inhibitory control. A 1-point change is actually above what stimulants do on this measurement. So your Adderall and Ritalin are doing around 0.5, 0.6. We get a point change. There's absolutely no change with anything else or an active control, which is meant to be good and help learn words, et cetera, something a parent may seek. But we can show very clearly that our medicine, our algorithmic medicine, that is, by the way, came with 11 total safety events, which ended up being things like headache, as opposed to usually about 50% safety events in drugs, which are things like 10% body weight loss or sleeplessness. There's kind of no comparison in terms of the risk-benefit ratio here. So we're actually taking this product to FDA in a month. We're submitting our package, and we'd hope, cross fingers, that by the end of the year we have the first ever FDA-approved product that looks like a video game, but is in fact prescribable medicine. So that's what we do. I'd love to talk about everything about the new stakeholders in medicine and why we can do better, I think.
Okay, I have about a million questions, and maybe even actually people in the audience wants to ask some too. We can welcome that. But you and I talked, and I do think, well, that's not the way you all have been thinking about it. It is the ultimate mashup of medicine and learning, right? And just as we, I mean, how do you sort of translate that comment? And do you believe it? And I guess there are a million extensions off of it. But for example, once you've got this done for ADHD, can it go to all of us? Because what you're doing is really improving a child's performance.
True.
And at some point, I presume you're going to do trials that actually show that performance showed up in grades, right? And so, I mean, that's probably not part of the FDA approval process, right? So I presume is completely logical.
Yeah.
So do you think there becomes a time when we can all do an Akili game and actually raise our level of intellectual performance?
Potentially. I mean, for us, there's both a scientific and a business model rationale of why we started in a diagnosed condition like ADHD. The business reason is we really want to make a credible mark and show that we can do what is somewhat unthinkable, which is take someone that has a medical problem and treat them with something that is totally different than they've ever seen before. So that's kind of the business reason, and we want that credibility. If we come to the consumer market in the future, we want to be the unquestioned medical leader with prescription-grade products that we can translate backwards, not the other way around.
Right.
So I think from a business model perspective, it's important. Scientifically, it's interesting. We've actually run a few studies with neurotypical children, and we don't see as large benefits as we see in children that have frontal cognitive dysfunction. So
But is that a matter of tweaking the product?
Potentially,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
So we built the product and the algorithms based on known neurocognitive deficits, and the rationale seemed to pan out because in the children with the largest deficits, we see the largest gains. And you can actually watch that neurologically, even EEG, when their brains are firing. A month later, we had a publication where they now activate strongly in the prefrontal cortex, look just like a typical child. So in some ways, it was designed for that. So can the future go there? I think so. What I'm nervous about today is that there's not enough credibility in either education or healthcare.
Right.
That if something just goes out today, there's just a mess of stuff that a parent who's well-meaning or a doctor even who's well-meaning has no idea what to choose from, and a teacher for that matter. So our thesis is if we can make that mark and that stamp in medicine, then we definitely can open up to other types of populations, but I think time will tell.
Because we also talked about this issue of extending this into the adult population around ADD and I mean, because what was interesting to me is, as you describe, kids who take medicine are simply trying to govern their behavior through high school. They haven't eliminated the actual disease or whatever symptoms or whatever the fundamental thing that's wrong. And so I'm curious just about proof of sustainability on the Akili product today, and then what you think could be possible once you all get past this, in kids, and what could happen in the adult population.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, at a basic level, the theory of what we do versus the theory of what molecules do for the brain should be patently obvious to us. So what we do is recondition neural networks, and again, you can see it in our publication, so that when a child is processing something, or an adult, we have data in adults as well, that their brain literally operates differently after they do a month of treatment. And that's no surprise in the learning field. That's how we learn.
That's
the
right.
only
Exactly.
way we learn is by conditioning our brain to operate differently. But in medicine, we essentially bind receptors and mask the symptoms. And it's no surprise there. What happens with, Adderall, et cetera, it's a huge industry. We think for a lot of kids it's actually very helpful because they would be totally disruptive otherwise. However, 6 hours off of your dose of Adderall, even if you've been on it for weeks, you're just like you were before you took any dose, right? There's absolutely no sort of underlying scientific basis that would lead you to believe there should be durability for a molecular approach, whereas the entire basis of what we do by stimulating neural networks is foundational to how we learn. So the ground truth science would speak to that, and we do have a bit of data, 2 different publications, one in adults, older adults, about 70-year-olds plus, and then one in 5 to 15-year-old children that show, they're not the perfect largest studies, they're not perfectly controlled, but they give implications that 6 and 9 months out, we still see benefits. We're trying to validate that in larger studies for sure, but the idea here would be, unlike a chronic medication, for a chronic condition like something like ADHD,
Right.
you may not have to take this chronically. Ideally, you get to take it. It will wax and wane. You'll have sort of regression, I'm sure, over time, as we've seen. But you hopefully, as you condition networks and learn, just like you would in an educational setting, that has a lasting benefit, and that's what we're hoping to prove out.
Take me back, I mean, how you got started here, right? I mean, what was
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have I mean, obviously you came from a deep science background,
Right.
medical background, but how did you develop the passion around addressing this? There's so many big problems to tackle in the
Sure.
healthcare field.
It's actually funny. So there were two different, I was the weirdest person that's probably not true.
You were,
I was
you
weird
were a philosophy
in grad
major, I
school.
saw that. You went to philosophy?
No, I did it as a side project, sort of. So I would come home from doing like molecular biochemistry, and then for some reason what gave me relaxation was reading neuroeconomics, as an example, but how the brain works to do things in the real world. So I used to do that as a hobby, and my wife would roll her eyes and be like, I can't talk about anything with you, is what she used to say. But that's what I did in my spare time. I also, as a total joke to my advisor, actually at one point presented the very first data. It ended up being a paper on the cover of Nature, so it was like a highly regarded paper.
So that was Adam Ghazali?
That was not. So actually before Adam Ghazali, the two
Interesting.
Nature papers in this field, one of them was our science that we licensed.
Yep.
The one about 10 years, 7 years before that was a researcher named Daphne Bavier, who had shown that action video games, things that are on the consumer market, while they have negative effects, they actually can have slight subtle cognitive effects. They're just not harnessed. So there's some active ingredient in there. And actually, I signed her up as our second advisor. And so these were things that had kind of percolated around, but I was with a group called PureTech in Boston. And there were a number of us who come from the drug world, and we were actually sitting about 7 years ago saying, what can we do differently for the brain? Because at that time, almost every major pharmaceutical company had pulled out of neuroscience or was backing out. They were not investing. They weren't doing trials purely from the standpoint of saying, most of our trials fail, so why are we going to sink money into it? And our point with a lot of other people was, you have to sink money into it because you have millions of people that don't have medicine. So that's kind of how this all coalesced. And then at the same time, right at 7 years ago is when we all started gaming on our phones. So it's kind of all of this came
that was how
together.
that mashup happened. I mean,
exactly.
You began to realize, but when did you have the aha moment that gaming could be the platform for neurological change?
I think I would say it was hopeful when we started this concept as we saw some games taking off, Angry Birds and others.
Yes.
Where we said, all right,
Does
people
that do something to your brain?
Probably not, or something subtle. But that's where I think that the hope was there, but I don't think the aha was there actually. And it was meeting scientists like Adam Ghazali. I remember meeting him. He runs the UCSF Neuroscape Lab, the largest neurophysiological center in the country at UCSF. I met him at a conference, and some of his early work, which was doing sensory and motor stimulus, but in these very rudimentary environments. Meanwhile, I was over here looking at these really sort of heavy tech environments, and I saw that rudimentary science, and that's why I said this could really happen. It could go from a hope to something real. And then we had to invest to make it happen. And I think, unfortunately, what you get in this kind of in mashup worlds, this happens not just healthcare education, but others, or healthcare and tech, you get this pull from kind of early investors who want you to do the easy thing.
Right.
So we had a huge pull early on from investors saying, all right, you have a really cool tech thing and you have some science, which a lot of people don't have, just go on the consumer market and get some easy wins. And we said we really didn't want to chase that dollar. We wanted to chase the patients who need it.
Well, and there have also been a bunch of frauds, frankly,
There have
right?
been a lot of frauds in this space.
And I presume that was one of the motives in going full force for the FDA piece.
Yeah, it was an easy thing for us to shoot against.
Yeah.
There was a company that everyone probably knows well that got a big old fine from the FTC.
Yes.
And unfortunately had a ton of users and really no data behind it. And so it was really easy for us we already wanted to go down the patient path. We got in this from a passion level because we wanted to develop new medicine, and that became a really easy thing for us to say, which is we didn't want to do that anyways, and now we can do the exact opposite. We can go all the way through FDA. The hard part is investing and taking that path, and then dealing with binary risk, which you don't have a lot of times in education and tech.
Right.
You have kind of uptake risk and market adoption risk, but you don't have the binary risk of oh shit, what if this trial fails?
It doesn't work.
Which
right.
we were
Right.
basically up until like December 4th of this past year, we were sweating and crossing our fingers, and the trial worked, which we thought it would, but you never know until you run the big studies.
So I know you won't say this, or hesitant, but is there any major stumbling block left between you and FDA approval, given the trial's success?
We're pretty confident on the FDA piece. Obviously there's plenty of negotiation.
Trump might do something.
I've got to say, the FDA is one of the few places that I've been really impressed with, because they've taken.
Oh, that's true. There is that the new guy.
Scott Gottlieb
right,
taken over. It's been
right,
incredible. There's been a much more kind of holistic approach to FDA
That's
and
right.
speeding
You're
things
right.
to
I forgot
market that
about
are
that.
safe. So it's probably the only thing I agree with over the last year. But no, I think we're in a good spot. We've been working with the FDA for 3 years. They essentially blessed our study design, and we went in with a slightly different study, and we worked with them to build the right study, and we've had great interaction with them. So you never know what could happen, but I feel pretty confident with that. I think it's around the edges of, is it the right information? How exactly does the labeling read? I mean, there's never been a treatment like this. So how is it? We're going to propose something, but that might take a while to hone down. But we want it to say something like, for the treatment of inattention and inhibitory control in ADHD, full stop. So that a doc can see it, understand it, a parent can see it, and then the convergence comes when, unlike much of the things in medicine, a teacher would also see it, and everyone would know exactly what that means. And that's what gets me excited.
Okay, so paint the 5-year picture. You're past this first hurdle. What you obviously have a roadmap.
Yeah.
What does Akili look like 5-10 years down the?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have a number of products. We've been talking a lot about ADHD, and it's the most relevant in this setting, I think. We do have treatments that are a step earlier, so they're in mid-scale clinical trials in treating cognition and depression, and then also treating cognition in autoimmune disorders, multiple sclerosis, lupus, and others. These are 2 huge needs, different than ADHD. ADHD, that is the core issue. In depression, and very much so in multiple sclerosis or other autoimmune issues, it's a sort of comorbid issue that is totally untreated by the medical industry. But it maps a lot to what we think about with education and workplace. It really deals to functioning and productivity.
Yep.
So in this world, you can make someone not sad. We can do that pretty well. And you can absolutely treat an individual's autoimmune issues so that they can walk again, which is huge. But you have 30 or 40% of either of those patients who just do not go back to work, who are earners, who are earning for their family, they can't go back to work, or who are adolescents who essentially fall off a cliff because of the sadness partly, but because they're not actually functioning at a level where they can truly function. So we have all these different products that are in development. Where I think
it's
we'll be
a really naive question.
Yeah, please.
But how different is it algorithmically? I mean, what are the big differences in
Both.
going from
So
ADD to
It's algorithmic for each population. Yeah. We only take basic algorithms that have a good scientific basis for stimulating part of the brain. And so we have 3 different algorithms, one for the prefrontal cortex, one for amygdala connections to prefrontal cortex, which is essentially emotional regulation connected to attentional regulation. And then we have spatial navigation type environments, which are more for memory conditions, and that's very exploratory for us. But then that's
interesting.
Yeah, and that'll be for aging in the future. But
I'm worried about aging, so I'd like you to get a move on that one.
I know. Some of our board members say the same thing. But what we do for any different products is we tweak the algorithm. So we test it in population, and this is where, unlike traditional medicine, we have a huge advantage. We can do 20-patient studies very, very quickly and understand how feasibility is happening, understand what neural signals look like without going through some ridiculous hurdles. And then we can actually tweak stuff. You can't say, oh, I wish that molecule just was a little bit different. Well, good luck. It's going to take you 10 years. We can make those tweaks and iteratively test. So we change the algorithms, but then we also change the front-end interface so that our ADHD product looks nothing like our treatment for depression. The algorithms are slightly different and tailored, but the content's very different to hopefully engage someone. So 5 years, I think, ideally, our ADHD product has been thriving on the marketplace, and importantly, and we do have a vision statement, which I won't go through with you, but It's thriving. They're literally, we think our addressable population in ADHD is 2 to 2.5 million kids, and maybe more. So because there are a lot of undiagnosed that are more just inattentive, not the hyperactive issues.
Right.
So I'm hoping that that's thriving. I'm hoping that we've worked out the commercial model, and my investors hate when I say this, but I don't think the commercial model will be what we launch with. I just don't think we know the best commercial model. And I do think it will involve stakeholders that traditionally haven't been involved, like educational stakeholders. In ADHD, teachers are usually the first to identify ADHD, and then there's like a 1 to 2 year gap before there's a diagnosis. We can play in that space. We have a safe product. We can't sell into schools, but we can absolutely think about advocacy and other types of education there.
Clinicians and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, school psychologists,
Right.
they get this
Right.
immediately.
Right.
This is how they
course.
were trained. So I'm hoping that our commercial model is honed and our ADHD product's thriving. And then I'm hoping that we've brought at least one other product to market. And we really built this company to be a true medicines company with multiple products.
Right. A platform.
And that's what we're hoping. Yeah, a platform.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. That was fabulous.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.